Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you this morning and to see such a group interested in the life of career and as a clinician scientist. I'm going to be talking about things that I'm really passionate about and explaining a little bit about my journey along the way. There's so many parallels with the things that have been said to you this morning, and I think you're going to hear a common thread throughout the day. I am from the country, as well as Robin previously. I'm from Sale in Gippsland, and I was at the University of Melbourne, came down and managed to work out my career to return to the country after everything interesting me to become a GP obstetrician. So that's sort of what I ended medical school thinking I would be. Went to do all the things I thought a GP obstetrician should do, like some emergency departments, some children's, some looking at psychiatry, and then looking at obviously doing my obstetric training. So I did a diploma of obstetrics. During that, and that was great, it was an extraordinarily busy few years of putting together what my clinical skills needed to be. I then, on my final GP obstetrics sort of term, happened to have a registrar who was a fantastic registrar. He had 2 fellowships already, one from South Africa, one from the UK, and he'd come to Australia to work as an obstetrician, but the College of Obstetricians wouldn't allow him. Because he knew so much about evidence-based practice, he'd failed his Australian exams because he argued with the examiners. Never a good thing. Anyhow, so he ended up having to do a bit more clinical time and then sit the ONG exams. And he gave me the piece of advice that he was going to keep all his evidence to himself and give the answers that they wanted this time around so that he would pass. And so he's a triple fellow obstetrician. But he inspired me to look at evidence and to look at clinical practice. And as a resident working with him, he got me to do the first sort of piece of research, which was a clinical audit of how we'd been managing obstetrics on the obstetrics unit, and present that to the leading clinicians, to all of the specialist obstetricians. And then he also introduced me to a book called Effective Care in Pregnancy and Childbirth, and that was the beginning of the Cochrane collaboration. And it was written for women, written for the public, and it was a companion to the very thick, huge 2-volume Effective Care in Pregnancy and Childbirth that Ian Chalmers had written as the academic piece. And within that, he could see I was interested in all this stuff, I suppose, but he said, look, Jane, take this, you can have my copy of this book, take it home, have a look at it. I read through it, I just devoured it. I thought, oh my goodness, there's things we do to women all the time. There's no evidence for them. Why are we doing them? Why do I hear the people that had been teaching me telling me things that just weren't shown to be effective? And this got me started on being interested in evidence. And then I happened to see, I was pretty exhausted after 3 years of doing these long shifts and 1 in 3 24-hour shifts of obstetrics at Preston and Northcote Community Hospital, which was extraordinarily busy for my obstetrics, and I thought I'd do something different. So there was an opportunity to be an academic GP registrar, and I thought, well, that will be good, because that'll be easy. Little did I know, but that'll be easy. I'll do that, and then I'll go, and keep going and do my fellowship, sit my fellowship for the College of GPs, and then off I'll go back to the country. I've never left, basically. I started that academic role, I loved it, I've kept going with clinical practice. I did my PhD because the government decided they needed more GP researchers, and I happened to get a PhD scholarship in the right place at the right time. I managed to seek out mentors along the way. And I'd just like to share with you some of the things that really have excited me and challenged me around the work that I do. So I know that some of you in the audience are going to be very attracted to the concept of generalism, and others are not. And the reality is that we need both. But I feel that one of the things that has been striking me more and more over the last 10 years is that we now need generalism more than ever. And for some of you that do become generalists, whether that's in surgery, medicine or primary care, some of you are going to turn to be the leaders and to lead the clinician science that we need in this area. Because I'm just going to put to you a little thing that drives me, which is the thing that we need clinician scientists, because we need doctors to be involved in the way that healthcare is designed and delivered. We can't leave it to the health economists, the politicians or the public, although all of those people need to be involved. But as clinicians, I feel that, you know, what drives me is to have an impact on what's happening nationally, to have a say, to be the voice of general practice as much as I can in the opportunities that I'm afforded because of the leadership roles that I've been fortunate enough to have just come my way. And I think that for many of you, you'll have these opportunities if you have that passion, if that's what you want to do. And I just say go for it, because you'll make such a difference. I want to say something about the shoulders on which we stand, and I've got some mentors that I'd like to tell you about, and then a little bit of my own research, how I've had a go at that. Hopefully we'll get time for all of that. So the ecology of medical care, this is something that struck me. I mean, how many of you have seen this? No? Oh, okay, maybe one or two little hands going up. Okay, so this is something that, you know, it struck me when I first sort of heard it. Firstly, it's really simple, 1,000 people in the community. You know, where are they? Well, out of 1,000 people, one of them, don't think the pointer works, one of them is going to be in a tertiary or quaternary hospital like Royal Melbourne, St V's, Austin, Monash Medical Centre, etc. All of them are going to visit the GP at least once a year, and around 750 of them, around 250 of them in the past month will have visited the GP. And out of that, 5 of them will be referred off to the specialist to have something looked at. Now, the thing that struck me when I first sort of heard about this is that it is the same in the US, even though they don't really have good primary care. It's the same in the UK. It seems to be a bit of a sort of ecology of what happens in a population with people, obviously, out of 1,000 people, 250 manage themselves. This was last repeated in 2001. It might have changed now in 2018, but it would be interesting to do again. So that's something that it's interesting to think about where you put your time. So the thing that really attracted me to being a GP was the whole idea of the doctor-patient relationship. And I think something that struck me out of doing the things I loved, which were paediatric terms, psychiatry terms, obstetric terms, they're the things that I found just really, really enjoyable, was the fact that I could play a role in helping those people to work out what was the best sort of care that they should have. And it struck me then that I could be one of those things, but because I liked doing that so much, the place where I got to do it a lot was when I went and did my first GP term. I was fortunate enough to meet Ian McQuinney, and he died some years ago now. He was a UK general practitioner who is actually what's called the founding father of family practice in Canada, because he went to work in Canada for most of his life. And he's written widely, and he basically is the person that put down the academic basis of primary care and encouraged GPs to be GP researchers. But he really put... Basically, if you're going to go out into being a GP or being a primary care physician, you really have to have that passion that you really are in it for that doctor-patient relationship. You're going to think of the person before you think of the disease. And that's the thing that's going to drive you to why you're going to enjoy general practice so much. It's because you're really drawn to that enjoying people, which I found that I really am drawn to that, and I love being an advocate for patients and sorting out things and having their care as best they can. Barbara Starrfield, I also was lucky to meet. She lived another primary care physician, paediatric oriented from the US. Her work is the most influential work in terms of the place of primary care in the healthcare system. And of course, this work had to come out of the US because they don't have strong primary care like we have here. But she did some fantastic work looking at where you have strong primary care in communities in the US, you had actually better health at the population level. And it was, you know, documented over and over in many different studies, and her contribution will live on for a very long time. Kurt Stange is a good collaborator of mine. He is still alive, pleased to say. He's in another US doctor, and he pointed out this paradox of primary care. So why is it that when you look at individual things that might help in knowledge of individual conditions in primary care, obviously general practitioners aren't going to know as much as specialists about any particular condition. I mean, they're just not going to, unless maybe they've had it themselves and they've really investigated it. But generally they're going to know much less. So why is it then at the population level that giving that care at the primary care level has better outcomes than when you don't, when you have a specialist-led healthcare system? And Kurt calls that the paradox of primary care, how both things are actually true. And that's an interesting thing to look more into, that fascinates me around understanding how that plays out. So the thing that I would really have been trying to do over the work that I've been doing is to think of how can I make a difference in the primary care setting? How can I make healthcare better for the people that come and see GPs? And I'm hardly a GP now, I only see people once a week, so it's just hanging in there by a thread. But I know all my colleagues who are out there right now seeing thousands of people around the country. How do I make sure that they do the best possible job they can? Because if the stuff that, you know, McWhinney and Starrfield and Stange are saying, if that's true, how do we make sure that the public are going to get the best care that we can, and make sure they link people in with the right services at the right time, make the right decisions about who to refer? That's a really important task, and one that I think doctors need to be very, very involved with. I think doctors bring something important to that can't just be done by you know, a computer or an algorithm or whatever, but we'll get on to that in a moment. This is some work of mine that was really started off on a journey of getting to know lots of other collaborators worldwide, but it was a really simple thing. As the introduction said, I established a cohort study to understand how depressive symptoms were managed in the community, because I was lucky enough to have a sabbatical at Oxford, time to think in the wonderful environment that's there, and I was looking for understanding how depression was managed in primary care to gather all the evidence that was there. And I found that hardly anyone had done a study longer than 1 year of people with depression anywhere, ever. And I couldn't believe it, but it was actually true. So I set off to and established a cohort here in Victoria, and we followed people for 10 years. And it's called Diamond. And out of that, lots of things have come, and I haven't got time to go through them all now. But this is one really simple thing, so simple. And a student called Darshini Aitan started doing that with me. And I said, Darsh, why don't you just have a look at how, you know, numbers of conditions are associated with depression? Because I'd started to become a bit sceptical that it was a particular condition linked to depression. There was a lot of this diabetes and depression, and there's people looking for maybe fundamental underlying biological mechanisms that linked them, which were really interesting. So, well, let's just have a look in this group and see whether we see any particular conditions making a difference, having a stronger association. And we actually didn't. We didn't find a particular condition with a stronger association. But we found that any chronic long-term condition had an association, and the more that you had, the more likely you were to have depression. So we published that in a place that was very hard for anyone to find it, because it was a small, relatively small cohort from Australia. But it actually got attention. It was picked up by the BMJ editor and put in one of the blogs about one of the most interesting and exciting ideas that had come out of any of the conferences he'd been to in the last few years. And then I started to come in contact with a group of developing researchers on multimorbidity. and that's been, that little graph led to so that's the dose-response relationship, led to collaborations with people in Scotland and encouraging them to sort of repeat things like that we'd done on the Diamond cohort on this big national data set of almost 2 million Scottish people. And this, of course, was published in a fantastic journal called The Lancet, because it was much, much bigger and a much, much bigger cohort of people that were studied. And this, once again, pointed out the importance of having multiple conditions. So you can see that, you know, most people don't have any conditions, and as you get older you get a condition, but, you know, there's a significant number of people that have multiple long-term conditions, so it doesn't matter. This work, I don't know if any of you have seen this bubble graph, but it's fascinating, and you can sort of think about it from many levels. Basically, it's just saying that there is a lot of multiple crossover between conditions that people have. And that's not a no-brainer, really. But as people age, they get older, we're seeing more of this. But we're also seeing more mental health problems with younger people as well. And the mental health and painful conditions are in the red dots. So one of the things that I want to point out is that on the far side, the no other condition, the people who have the single disease on the left-hand side, how many with people with coronary heart disease have no other condition? 9%. For example, how many people with hypertension have no other condition? 22%. How many people with depression have no other condition? 25%. So as you see, what I'm going to put to you is that the people we do most research on in our carefully conducted randomised trials are the people on the far right-hand side, okay? They're the exception, not the rule. And that's a really interesting thing to ponder, because we make all the others ineligible for the study when we're studying a particular condition, for good reason, because we want to study that particular condition. But if we're interested in people and how things happen in the whole organism of the person, then we have to start to become interested in this area of multimorbidity. And that's kind of had me doing lots of research over the last 10 years. It's now gaining a lot of outside of the primary care field, it's now entering into health policy fields to be important. And this is a report from the Academy of Medical Science, our organisation in the UK, around which they released in April of 2018. But this work around multimorbidity started in the primary care setting in Canada in about 2001. But now we're all getting interested in it. So I just want to say the other things that we need to be mindful of is the fact that medicine is changing. We can see people using electronic medical records in the general practice setting. Australia has been an early adopter, and we have now 90% of our 92% of general practices are fully using EMRs. They're not that smart, but they are using EMRs. They're not linked and all of those things, but there's a lot to say about that. We're also seeing, Quokta, where you can go online and get a doctor, We've got doctors' appointments and linking up sort of software. So we're in a really rapidly changing space. What I find very exciting is the fact that there's an opportunity as a GP researcher to shape what the future looks like. And one of my heroes, who is a University of Melbourne graduate, who's passed away many years ago now, is Charles Bridges-Webb. And he managed to start off this wonderful study of his own practice in Traralgon back in the 1970s, and managed to do research from his practice there. That's still possible. So for many of you who go into your own private practice, whatever it might be, in whatever area, it's possible to do research there. But as Robin pointed out, you really, if you're going to go onto the big journey of looking at things in detail, you really need to start thinking about your PhD, etc. So I am going to finish with this little timeline of my little parting word, which is whatever you do, and this was said to me many years ago, have your eye on the big picture. So have your eye 10 years down the track. Think about what you really want to change. And so I started off thinking that I wanted to make everybody's experience in general practice who came with a mental health sort of overlay to their condition, whether it was the primary condition or interacting with other physical conditions, I wanted to make the care that they receive the best possible care that they should get, right back to that effective care in pregnancy and childbirth. I had that thought in about 2001, that was my driving thing for being. It is only now in 2018 that I can report that the work that I've been working on over the last 17 years is finally out in a sort of implementation trial across 3 states funded by the Australian government. It's taken a very long time, even though the thing that I've been working on is really quite simple. And I just encourage all of you to just go for the thing that you find really important, that's going to keep you up in the night and on the weekends and keep you interested and loving your work. Because when you find it, it is just so much fun. Thank you.